Hello, welcome back to the AI Interconnect Podcast. Where we spotlight the builder, thinker, and innovators shaping the future with tech and tenacity. And I'm your host, Laurent. And today I'm joined with someone who's not just thinking about the future of manufacturing, but he's building it. Our guest is Justin D'Angelo, founder and CEO of Printera 3D, a company at the forefront of intelligent 3D printing and manufacturing automation, from material science to design freedom. Justin is helping push the boundary of what's possible in production. And Justin, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Laurent, thank you so much for the awesome introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here.
That's awesome. Let's begin and immediately rewind a little bit before we jump into the deep end. Your path into this space isn't exactly textbook,
Yep,
and can you walk us through your journey? What led you to launch Printera?
sure. So, to your point, this industry is very interesting because a lot of the kind of movers in this space either come from a construction background or come from somewhere completely different. And I'm the story of someone completely different. Um, my background is in project management with a focus on IT enterprise projects. So things like ERP system deployments and large applications. I even touched a little bit in AI before it was the big deal that it is today.
Mhm.
Um, but I've always been a 3D printing enthusiast. And when I say that, I'm just talking about the small plastic hobbyist printers. The kind of things that you just make knickknacks and little toys with. But I've been fascinated with the technology since I first was exposed to it. I want to say maybe 12 or so years ago. Um, and then my journey into this construction 3D printing actually came as a result of an article that I saw, I guess, coming in on 6 years ago now. That came through my inbox on from a website that was just, focusing on 3D printing, and they said,
Okay.
"Hey, this company's printing a house," and I was so intrigued by what they were doing that not only did I really consume the article, but I reached out to the company directly, to their founder, and said, "Hey, I'm just very interested in this, and is it possible that I could come observe one day?" And he was very gracious, and he said, "Absolutely, come down to the site. We've actually got a project in Florida, so you're welcome to drop by and visit." So I took a vacation day. I went and I just observed, and I left that
Awesome.
day with the with a very renewed interest in the technology and the idea that it's an emerging industry that's going to disrupt construction. And even though I don't come from the construction background myself, I have an appreciation for that field. I know a lot of people that work in that field. I'm personally pretty handy. I've done a lot of home renovation style projects and minor construction things on my own, but I'm not a general contractor. I'm not a licensed builder or an architect or anything like that. So I looked at it and said, how can I take this underlying technology and apply it to something a little bit smaller scale that's it's not as complex as a whole building? And that was the genesis of my company.
That's wonderful, and I, I had the idea of the opposite. I was about to ask if it was because of specific frustrations or gap you saw in traditional manufacturing that made you want to build something different. In fact, but
No, so yeah,
that's
so
not
I
so much the case.
exactly not so much the case, and I'm also closely tied to manufacturing. My my whole growing up, I've lived abroad, Singapore for a few years, south of France for a few years, Australia, and that was because my father was actually tightly involved in manufacturing, and he was establishing plants in those markets. He would be responsible for like the whole Southeast Asian market while we lived in Singapore, and then the same thing with Australia and New Zealand. And so I've always kind of had a close relationship with manufacturing. And then in high school and college, I was working in internships in manufacturing where I had a specific focus on quality, learning some of the Japanese quality principles and Six Sigma and Kaizen, Poka-yoke, all of those concepts. And I've always kind of known, at least in my startup journey, even though my career was in information technology, that if I was going to start a company, I wanted to make a product, right? I wanted to have a real physical thing that somebody could hold and feel, and it brings immediate value to their life, right? Because I think that the world of apps and IT is very saturated, and it's hard to come across a really unique idea these days. But when you make a physical object, right, you're basically immediately creating value if you're successful. So that was,
exactly.
even though I didn't set out right with the manufacturing in mind, it's always been kind of a voice in the back of my head and a baseline of where I started. So, yeah.
That's exactly. I mean, something material that I prefer to touch into. That makes sense. And for people who are not deep into the world of additive manufacturing, or it's how you call it. What exactly is Printera's mission today?
Sure. So we're aiming to revolutionize the architectural and landscape feature market by effectively bringing customization to the mass market, right? So the traditional world of manufacturing revolves around inventory and purchasing from a catalog, right? Or very high-end bespoke features. So if you want to go custom, it's not mass production, and you typically pay a premium. So to your point of additive manufacturing, right, or additive construction, depending on how you look at our market segment, what we're able to do is create these customized elements, right, completely unique from one customer to another, without bringing in the additional incurred cost of changing a manufacturing line or retooling or any of the things that make manufacturing expensive on a one-off basis. So additive is great, right? 3D printing is amazing because it does allow that full customization. And our robot, right, although the material is the same from one object to the next, it also is completely agnostic to what it's printing, right? I could print for you, Laurent, a couple planters, and then my next customer could say, I would like a fountain. And then immediately following that, I could have a massive project like the one we did in New York City, where we're making a 60-foot long bench with planters integrated into it, right? So that the transition from one element to another is very seamless, and it doesn't require any changeover of the production line or our processes. And that's the beauty of additive.
I love it. I love it. And who are your typical clients? OEMs, engineers, architects? Is the focus more on prototyping or short-term manufacturing or something else?
It's predominantly bespoke features today, and really our market breaks down into two categories. So one is direct to consumer, right? So that's the smaller elements that you would have in a traditional residence. It could be as simple as some planters or a bench, and as broad as an outdoor kitchen or large privacy features, or some light structural elements for their home. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the larger commercial projects. So that's where we're talking about integrating with architects and landscape architects and large commercial developers to do those big community features where you have public space elements, right? Like I mentioned the New York City project of the 60-foot long bench that's going in the lobby of a hotel in Manhattan. So, it gets a lot of foot traffic and a lot of people that'll see it, touch it, use it. And you can imagine that the process of securing that type of project versus the direct to consumer is a very different model. So
it's a piece of art, basically.
Yes. Yeah. That's the other way that we put it, right? It's functional art. And the great thing when you use the word art with something is, at least in Florida, what we're seeing now is the majority of new construction projects that are occurring have a municipally mandated percentage of their overall project budget that they have to allocate to public art. So it's typically 1 to 3% of the total project allowance has to go into art pieces. And when you can turn the art into a functional element, right, like a bench or like a feature that somebody can use, it becomes more palatable for the developer, right, who's contractually obligated to spend some of their project budget on those pieces.
Wonderful, awesome. There is a lot of noise in the 3D printing space for some time, and everyone's promising the factory of the future. And what's Printera's difference between your competitors?
So in the world of construction, additive concrete 3D printing, right? So particularly around concrete, the vast majority of companies are working on factory in the field style deployments. So they're using a large gantry style system, or a robot on treads, and they're transporting it to the construction site, and they're printing it directly in place where it will ultimately where its final position, essentially, right? That, while it sounds like a good concept because you're eliminating some transportation complexities, harpens back to one of the challenges of additive construction. And it's the reality that as you're 3D printing, regardless if it's a plastic or a concrete, it's a very sensitive material to be printing relative to the environment that it's in. So environmental conditions like humidity and temperature all have a very real impact on the finish and the quality of the object. And so what we're seeing in the field for construction 3D printing is if you're working on something large like a house, which is the majority of concrete printing today, and you're printing it on the construction site, even on the most perfect, beautiful day, the difference in environment from the morning to the afternoon results in a visible difference in the quality as you're proceeding with that object. So Printera's original concept and that what set us apart in the market initially was that we took that concept and we brought it indoors. So we have a manufacturing facility. We are controlling the print environment, right? We're monitoring humidity and temperature, but then we also have a sensor suite throughout the process of 17 different metrics that we're watching in real time so that we can make the adjustments on the fly to alleviate any of the issues that are just inherent in concrete as a material. So we ultimately end up with a print quality that's close to unmatched. There's one or two other companies that are doing something similar. But the name of the game there is to produce an object that is more or less hands off of finishing processes, that the robot can print it and then it's ready to ship, right? We don't have to go back and stucco it or smooth it out, right? We just want it to be done and ready to go. So that's the first main kind of differentiator.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. It's this is one of the climate is one of your challenges, and I wanted to talk about that and about the messy sides. There's a lot of messy side, and what are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing in scaling intelligent 3D printing?
Yep.
Basically, apart from climate.
So once you eliminate the variability of the climate, then the next biggest challenge is the material itself, the print material. Concrete is a really unique material because it's different from market to market, and that could be as broad as globally, but it could be as specific as even within the state of Florida, right? One batch plant that makes the concrete in Miami, following the same exact recipe, is going to have a different product from one that's making it in Tallahassee, because the sand grade is different. Some of the raw Portland cement that goes into it is a little different. And so what you bump into is quality and consistency issues, right, as you're printing. And it's very sensitive. Concrete as a material, it's very sensitive to not only those environmental changes, but things like hydration, right? Concrete hydrates naturally, right? It wants about 20% water in the field for its optimal strength. But in 3D printing, you have to oversaturate it at around about 30%. And that's to give it the pumpability properties that it needs to be able to be extruded from the 3D print system. And if you are off of that 30% target, even by just a percentage point in either direction, it'll have potentially a devastating effect on the print, where you either have cracking and just like a really ugly extrusion, or on the other end of it, it's too wet and it won't stand up, right? And you have print failures. So having reliable material that's really spot on to the recipe and well blended is really key. And then obviously you need your systems internally to be able to match that same quality requirement that's on the material
To handle
provider,
it.
that it's mixing homogeneously and it's doing so consistently.
Then okay, challenges, material, climate, as we saw just before.
Yep.
Is tech maturity another
A little bit,
challenge?
a little bit insofar as customer education, that this is even a solution in my specific
Market
field
education.
is exactly right. So the maturity of the technology, it's on a steep growth curve. There's constantly new advancements in terms of how the machines handle material and the different types of outputs that you can get. But that's known within the industry. But the reality of just approaching our customer base today is that a lot of people don't even understand 3D printing yet, regardless if you're talking about it at construction scale. So now you're implementing, hey, we're 3D printing and we're doing it for stuff that you can use around your home. It's not just little toys of plastic. It becomes a customer education challenge. So a lot of my time in business development is spent going to architects and planners and designers and doing educational sessions, lunch and learns, right? Here's how you can use this technology in your projects, and here are the limitations, right? And by the way, yeah, exactly. Yeah, please.
No, go.
I was gonna say, and by the way, our limitations are different than another company that's doing something similar. So even if they had exposure to it before, right, they heard about 3D printing, maybe some other companies can do some things that we can't, and we can do some things that other companies can't. So it makes it a unique challenge for the design teams to ultimately implement it. So it's a very unique. It's a unique market and it has a lot of challenge.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of industry like this. I mean, AI, not everybody can understand how to adopt it right now, but they need to adopt it right now. Electric cars, I mean, do we want it? Should we do it right now? There is EV chargers every 200 kilometers and things like this. Then, and maybe you have another challenge, which would be resistance from legacy players because they don't believe it, and they say, but I mean, this printer will do. I mean, this way of doing it will be better.
And I find that legacy companies in the industry are intrigued by the technology, right? That they're more willing to embrace it in partnership with us, which is great, because it's as a startup, a concern is that you could look at 3D printing construction and say, oh man, this is a market that there's not a lot of barriers to entry, right? Anybody with enough capital can go out and buy a concrete 3D printer, and then all of a sudden you've got a competitor. And what a lot of folks don't realize is that there's a science to how the machines and materials work, but there's also a little bit of an art, and that's kind of where the competitive advantage comes in, and the experience. And so what we found is there's a lot of companies that you're talking about, like those legacy players that have dabbled in additive manufacturing in concrete, and they quickly realize it's a more complex beast than they initially thought it was going to be, and then they end up reaching out and saying, hey, let's do a project together, right? And that's been great for me as a startup. But it's interesting because 3D printing, if you think about the consumer grade products, right, your plastic printers like the Bamboo Labs things and the Creality printers, right, it's only been in the last 5 years that those have been more user friendly, right? If you go back 10 years ago or 12 years ago when I first got into it, even though the affordability came down, right, the cost came down, it still was not a trivial thing to buy a plastic printer and stick it in your office and think that you were just going to be producing immediately, right? There's bed leveling and understanding slicing and software. So the market's making leaps and bounds in the direction now with those printers where you can just buy it and take it out of the box and it effectively works. And if you extrapolate that to construction printing, I still think we're at least a good decade away from just your mom and pop general contractor being able to buy a printer and all of a sudden think they're going to print buildings or features. It's still kind of a niche market with a special expertise.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing. Going forward, you're also working at the age of automation and AI, I suppose.
Yep.
How do those technology enhance or complicate what you're building?
So today, for AI in the world of Printera it's all on the design side. So when we look at the objects that we're actually creating, we can parametrically generate them, right? So that's using basically computational sliders and parameters to designate your design. So that's made a real impact on the world of CAD, because previously, if you went to a customer and you presented something like a planter, right, and you said, "Here's what we came up with based on your requirement." If they wanted changes, right? Oh no, it needs to be taller, it needs to be wider, the pattern should be a little bit different. You would have to go back and redraft it. Now um, with computational modeling, right? Everything's based on numerical input, so you'd have one slider, for example, that's the height of the object, and you can adjust it in real time, and the object changes in real time. So that's the first place that we're seeing kind of broader application of AI in a way. I think to use the term AI for that is a little bit of a stretch, but it is still it's still computationally generated.
Yeah, technology.
And right, exactly, yeah. But the next place is there's a lot of models now that are actually generating CAD models based off of a word prompt, right? So we're back to not even having to do the underlying design of an element. We can just find a large language model that has object generation and say, hey, draft me a column, right? And it needs to be of the Roman style, right? And it changes in this way. And then you get an OBJ file out of this thing that you can import and then maybe make some CAD adjustments to, right? That's where your manual play is. But the implementation of AI in that way expedites the creation of those models. So you're not refined anymore to spending hours and hours drafting something up from scratch. You kind of have a jump start. So it's another cool place that we're seeing it. And then I'm going to take your question and then kind of further build on it and say, where are we looking at it in the future? And we're taking it from design into the manufacturing environment. So as I mentioned earlier about the 17 sensors that we're monitoring over the course of a print, those are things like the pump pressure and the servo temperature and the servo capacity of the mixer. And those things are changing over the course of the print because of the way that the concrete's setting up and the fact that it's an exothermic reaction that's happening when you're injecting accelerant, so that the print nozzle's heating up over the course of a print day. And today, we have that real-time data feed, but it's still a manual operator interaction to go in and say, okay, the pressure's climbing, I have to increase the water or reduce the accelerant a little bit, right? That's the art element that's in the operator experience, but that's a ripe area for AI innovation, right? Where ideally a computer vision application or even just an AI software suite that reads the data and can make the adjustments as it's seeing things change outside of its preferred parameters. I think that's where you're going to see the lowest hanging fruit for disruption.
Definitely. Very much, very good, and talking about the future or your vision, um, what does the future of manufacturing look like for you in 3 to 5 years?
Sure. So for us, it's this element of the micro factory. So concrete is, back to the challenges of concrete and it being a unique material. While we have shipped projects around the country, it's not economically scalable to do that at volume, right? Concrete, it's heavy, it bears expensive shipping costs, it's prone to breakage. So the model for us is to have, a smallish facility, something that can outfit 3 to 4 printers, and then you establish these microfactories in the demand markets where you're seeing a lot of economic growth activity. So today, as we expand our facility, we'll be able to very nicely satisfy the Florida market. But in 3 to 5 years, maybe we have a Printera satellite location in the Northeast to address New York and Boston, and maybe there's one in Texas to address that market. And I think that's kind of the
that's your
right.
decentralization. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's really unique to the beauty of additive manufacturing in our way, because when we have a similar or the same printer and material at all of these locations, and you have one library of designs that we are validated and know print well, then it's relatively straightforward to stand up these satellite locations, right? You're not you're not reinventing the wheel, right? They're not starting from scratch with trying to figure things out, right? It's a shared knowledge base, the same system, and ideally the same material, right? Even though I mentioned small differences from market to market, even if you're centrally dispersing the raw material to these locations, it still stands to reason that they can generate a like product from each of these satellites.
Then this satellites, this centralization where you put like 2 or 3 little printers for the eastbound region or something like this. Could we have also into this future the machine or the printers more intelligent at the edge, more sustainable on the consumption? I don't know exactly, or something entirely different.
It's certainly possible. I think a lot of the innovations going into the automation of the printing operation, and then equally there's a lot of innovation in the materials. So when you talk about efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Presently, or at least environmental efficiency. Presently in our facility, we're looking at essentially a 5-gallon bucket of waste for an entire print day. And then even that ends up getting recycled. So we send it to a concrete plant that recycles it. So we're as close to a zero waste facility as we possibly can be. And then you're also touching on the benefit of additive, being that it's relatively labor free, right? So obviously you need somebody in there to oversee and operate the machine. But on any given day at Printera, there's one single operator running our manufacturing cell. So if you compare us close to traditional competitors in our world, that's precasters, right? Who are building forms and tying rebar and filling forms up, right? Breaking them away. You have form waste. You have a lot of labor, and you have a long cure time that stuff needs to sit in the warehouse or in a cure area before it's dispatched. And the additive nature of what we're doing addresses a lot of those challenges. And that also harpens back into how easy it would be to stand up satellite print locations, because you don't need a major labor force to support these sections. And a single operator that gets trained on the system does not need to be the same one that knows how to program it, right? The programming can come from, the corporate office. If it's the same system and it's oriented the same way, a single operator can just come in, pull his file, and be set up to print for the day. So the whole technology stack from the concrete to the execution of the print, it lends itself very well to a remote supported operation with a very minimal labor footprint, which is pretty cool.
It's fantastic. Then from the future to your vision, what role does Printera plays in that future, and what's your roadmap right now uh, that you are exciting about for Printera?
Sure. So as we speak now, we're in the process of expanding our initial facility, right? So the last 3 years for Printera has been proof of concept and finding market acceptance of the technology in our product. I think we've been successful at doing that. We're generating revenues and we're deploying these elements out into the real world. Now it's about scaling and showing that we can, satisfy the market, or at least our regional market of South Florida. So we're looking to, triple or quadruple our space, have additional printers, all in the name of capacity and building out the business. And then in parallel, my roadmap would have been 3 to 5 years. I want to see a satellite print location and to prove out that concept. But because we did this kind of public fundraising thing on a Reg CF and we're selling shares, we got a lot more exposure more quickly than I anticipated. And I have different parties that are interested in essentially franchising the Printera concept, right, with that satellite print location. So
Fantastic.
we haven't locked anything in specifically yet because I'm still determining what the best approach is going to be to that market, whether we want to offer a franchise and partner with people in that way, or if we want to do something a little bit more corporate owned with kind of semi-owner operators in different markets. But there's a lot of potential that's already kind of happening, and it could end up being that you see a Printera in a second or third market sooner than later, and it was faster than I had originally planned.
Fantastic. That's very, very interesting. On a personal point of view, one thing I always like to ask founders is you are juggling tech, leadership, strategies all together. How do you stay sharp and forward looking yourself?
This is a very good question, because lately I feel like I'm going from sales meetings to operations to forward-looking strategy and just kind of bumping around between all these things.
Exactly.
I find it's at least for me personally, that it's how I'm able to use my time between activities and balance it as well with family. Right, I have a 2-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter, and right, so I want to be available and present for those kind of precious moments in their life. And so it's trying to maintain some segmentation of work and home, which is very difficult as a founder. So yeah, it's time efficiency. So if I'm on the road and I'm driving somewhere, I'll listen to podcasts, right? And I'll hear from other experts in their domain, right? And that's a great way of staying apprised and learning from people. And then the other thing is keeping good and close relationships with folks that they may not have any direct immediate value to Printera right today, right? Like that, but other than just being somebody with a unique perspective and different person that I can speak to, right? Like I've always been of the opinion that there's no such thing as a wasted time when it comes to conversation with people, because Laurent, you're going to provide a unique perspective from somebody that I could be speaking to. For example, yesterday I was I had to go get my vehicle serviced, and I started out in the waiting lobby just listening to a podcast, and then a gentleman came and he sat next to me, and we were the only two people in the waiting room, and I started talking to him, and it turns out he was a Navy pilot who was in the 80s landing on aircraft carriers, and then he culminated his career as a commercial pilot for Delta Airlines, and he just retired, right? And so he brings a very unique perspective on his career in the world, and he had no experience in concrete printing, but when I explained what I was doing to him, he had ideas for applications that I never even would have thought of, right? And that's the beauty, right, of keeping good, close relationships with people that I have no intention to sell anything to the people that I'm talking to, right? But I like to get to know people and learn about their backgrounds, and you never know. So it's a combination of all those things.
Exactly, it's the whole purpose of this podcast as well. I mean, the biggest purpose is yourself, you and your company, but definitely so many things can come up and reach us and make us smarter, learn from the others. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Then your good habits. I mean, you need to have good habits for maintaining your sharp and forward-looking, and maybe mental models also.
Yeah, that and try and get a good night's sleep every night, right? That's the baseline, and what I should be doing that I'm not doing is maybe going to the gym a little bit and trying to stay as physically sharp as I am mentally, but there's only so many hours in the day, and I'm considering that my sacrifice right now.
run with your kids, play football with your guy, and
there you go, exactly,
and dance with a girl.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, then next segment, for younger funders or engineers listening, maybe those still figuring out their space. What advice would you give them when it comes to launching in a frontier market like this, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the advice that I had to come into, that the hardest thing for me to do in starting this company was to take the leap of faith and go all in on it, right? It's hard to approach a new market with a new technology, and there's not much market analysis that you can really do to say, okay, this is a sure thing, right? That I'm gonna launch a company and I'm gonna be successful and I'm gonna have this much traffic and do this much business, right? We're not starting a restaurant. We're not doing whatever, right? Like you're talking about folks who are looking to get into something unique and groundbreaking. And the reality is there's no time like the present, because the longer you wait, the longer the more opportunity there is for somebody else to come in and disrupt on your idea. But additionally, in my experience, the longer you wait, the harder it is to make that ultimate decision to jump in. If I look back at what I was doing 5 years before starting the company that I started today, my life circumstances definitely changed, right? I mean, I have the 5-year-old daughter and the 2-year-old son, and just thinking about life continues whether you're making the move or not. So that I was going to have a family, whether I was a startup founder or whether I was working for a corporate IT company. And again, the longer you allow time to pass without taking the leap, I think the harder it becomes. And you that's not to say you shouldn't make the decision from a place of education and knowledge, right? Like research your market before jumping in. But ultimately, you have to give it a shot. And
yeah,
the other thing I'll say is a lot of the successful folks that I've encountered, not just in my direct industry, but in general, didn't necessarily come from a place of expertise in that industry, right? If you find something that you're interested in, your passion will drive you to become the subject matter expert in that field. And I don't think it's a holdback, right? You don't need to be formally educated as an engineer to create a cool widget or a cool object, right? And equally, I didn't need to be a builder or an architect to start a company that's serving those markets. And I think that's, that might be a holdback for some folks, but I encourage it not to be.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a great advice. Great advice. Let's let's wrap with a few rapid fire bullets
Sure.
questions.
Okay.
If I must say, one trend or tech trend you're bullish for in 2025.
Okay. I am very much on the AI bandwagon, right outside of my direct field. I'm really intrigued at the development of some of these large language models and in AI image generators and things. I think that they're going to continue to accelerate at a rate that is amazing, and I'm using them every day in my day-to-day work. And I find more and more people that are starting to do the same, and I think it's going to be a big disruptor. So that's my
Fantastic.
number one. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's my line of business. One thing you wish more investors or clients understood about additive manufacturing.
That it's not a plug and play solution. You can't just buy a printer and be up and effective immediately, right? That there's more to it than that. I can't tell you how many different venture capital calls and meetings that I've had where people go, oh, well, what's your barrier to entry? And it seems like there's not a great one from a layman's standpoint, but as you get in and you start seeing how an operational flow and at least this market works, it's there's a lot of kind of trade secret and art and application that goes into it. So yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And if you were not building Printera, well, what would you be doing?
So if I was not building Printera, I would most likely still have my previous job. However, I'm gonna take your question to be what alternative company would I start? Because I've always been an entrepreneurial person at heart. Growing up, I was really into video games with my friends. I used to play a lot of them, and I really haven't had the option or opportunity to do so very much since being a founder of my company. But it's still an interest that I have. So I think if I started another company or Printera was wildly successful and I exited one day, I might look at starting a little game studio. I think that would be a very fun thing to do and kind of flex my creative muscle in that way. It would be an interesting thing.
An AI studio, then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lastly, what book or podcast that influenced your thinking lately?
Ooh, that's a good one. So there's and I'll kind of selfishly put this one out there because I recently guested on it and I wasn't aware of them before I guested. But there's a podcast group called the Koyas Collective. They are all around entrepreneurs and people that have really unique startup stories, and the podcasts are very well done. They're very professionally moderated, and the production quality is really excellent. I highly recommend anybody that hasn't heard of them to check them out because they've done a nice job.
That's fantastic. This is everything was eye opener and enlightening and very nice. Justin, this has been very awesome. I love what you're building with Pantera. It's not just about hardware or printing layers. It's about reshaping how things are made from the ground up. And for anyone listening who want to follow your journey or connect, what is the best way to reach you or your team?
Sure. So first of all, our website is printera3d.com. It's Printera 3d.com. We're also on all the social platforms. So Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. You can find us on all those places. And then I freely give people my information to reach out. You can email me at jdangelo@printera3d.com. So it's J as in Justin, D'Angelo, my last name. And I'm happy to talk to anybody. And I guess one final thought that I have, and just kind of setting the vision for why this is a unique technology and kind of why we're doing this and driving forward is to actually borrow from a gentleman that I had met several years ago in a prior role, and he was talking about what does the world look like that we live in, right? And how, where are the places that are meaningful to individuals, right? When you think about places that you enjoy spending your time, and typically it's in unique environments, right? That stand out. Whether that's a vacation destination or a restaurant that you like for some particular reason, the ability for us to impact that built environment in a unique, bespoke way and create a world that we can live in where there's unique features everywhere you go, and it's not always the catalog of seeing the same panel and the same column at every place you go, right? Where every parking garage, right, has the same bland concrete structure. We can inject a little bit of art and personality into every environment in which we live. I think it just creates a cooler built environment for everyone to live in and to enjoy. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Anything else you want to add, or?
No, I just also expressed my appreciation for having me on the show. I again, anytime I get to talk to anybody is a good time for me. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thanks again for being on the show, and you have set the bar very high for where this tech can go. And I know a lot of people are going to take something very valuable from this conversation. And until next time, stay curious and stay connected.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Laurent.
Bye-bye.